Welcome to episode 18 of the Wheelhouse, a special after hours edition. I am Andrew O. With me is no one, Sterling and Gus, still dead, rest in peace. And as of this recording, it is 10:55 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Not the usual time I like to record. I like to just hit around what we would normally do, which is around 5. But as things go, I'm doing it now, and I say after hours, not only because it's later than usual, but also I do not have anything written down. No agenda, no planned notes, no planned topics. I decided, hey, why not just turn the mic on, get me talking, and see what happens. And as I'm saying this right now, I'm scratching my head to think of something to talk about, and I'm rambling on right this second to eat up time. I guess I could talk a little bit about why I'm doing this a little later. It's mostly because I'm getting ready for what I'm about to do for the next 2.5 weeks. I'm flying back to Texas, and then which is 3-hour flight, and then get in, sleep one night, and then early the next day drive 3 hours to Nacogdoches, if that's how you say it. And when we're there, I'm going to be production mixing on a feature film. I think I mentioned this last week. SMU, the school I go to, does every 2 years. The film department supports the production of a feature-length film, primarily student-run, which is real cool. And yeah, I'll be heading the sound department, which is exciting and nerve-wracking, all in one giant bundle. And I've been preparing a lot. Not only the immediate sort of packing, clothes, toiletries, whatnot. I'm also doing a lot of research about sound stuff. And it is really scary because I've not done anything close to this scale. 2.5 weeks with like 12-hour work days. It's going to be pretty intense. And there's a lot riding on this, or I feel like at least. Sure, at the end of the day, it's just a film and whatever. He could be, stored away in a vault, never seen again, and we'll still all move on with our lives, unless we're dead, which you can't help anyway. So, I tend to try and, consciously tell myself, like, lower the stakes, You prepare what you can. If you feel like you have done enough research that you can, just go in and, do what you can, roll with the punches. As long as you stick with that good old Murphy's Law, you should be fine. I always live by Murphy's Law. And you should too. It's very important. It'll get you through a lot. And so that's what I've been doing these last couple days. And it has been a strange last few days. Sterling and I, rest in peace, we have this term called temporal mush. That is the time after classes end through your last final. Now, some people just call that finals week. No, that's reductive. It is actually, indeed, temporal mush, where your regular schedule that you've been accustomed to the whole semester is thrown out of whack, and you suddenly find yourself having a lot of time on your hands, but also having a lot of obligations to do as well. Studying for finals, final projects. And because everything's out of whack, there's no strict guideline of how to manage that time. So, yes, you are handed just sort of blank slate, and you go, wow, now I could, watch more movies or watch a TV show in addition to studying and have some time to spare, which you can reasonably do. It's just actually getting through that. It feels really off. Again, your routine's out of whack. And a lot of times you're sort of aimless and you don't know what to do with yourself. Because you have that battling mentality of, man, I just want to get this over with. I should study. But I also have some time where I could, be watching some, video on YouTube and goofing off. And I really, the main emotion is I just want to get this over with and go home. Can't blame anyone who thinks that, including me, which I definitely felt this semester, which was a first, oddly enough. And I've been having that temporal mush this last almost week, where, I had read a few books, I read Fahrenheit 451, Slaughterhouse-Five, both very good. And, watched a couple movies, finished a couple video games. And I was at that weird point where I thought, there's this impending obligation of the shoot, 2.5-week film shoot. And I can't really, indulge myself in another big media splurge. I can't watch a huge TV show, except for the one I'm going to talk about later. I can't, start investing myself in some long RPG or something. Yes, that time a lot of it was, I do have a week of straight up free time. And I have time that I could pretty much spend any way I see fit. But I had that one side going, hey, you should really, prepare for this thing and study about different microphones and polar pickup patterns, how to lava a car, all that stuff. But also, wouldn't it be great to just sit back and read a book or listen to some music or whatnot? And I go, yep, I want to do both those things. And because no one's telling me how to manage it, it felt weird. It felt sort of aimless, where I didn't want to sort of do either. So a lot of it was sort of pushed off. And by consequence, this recording has been pushed off. By no means is it going to be late. I mean, you won't even be able to tell. It'll just be up like normal. But I feel it. I'm feeling it right now. Getting a little tired. What are you going to do? Oh, and I hate flying too. Not so much traveling. I separate, traveling / vacationing with the transportation aspect. I just don't like wasting time sitting around. It just drives me crazy. And I'm not scared of flying. I've gotten past that point. Sure, I have a few seconds every flight of, man, I could die right now. And then that goes away. It used to be longer and more frequent, but I've gotten older, I suppose. It's mostly just, alright, I gotta go sit around for 3 hours. Can't watch a movie. I could, but that's not the ideal place to watch a movie. Could read a book, but then I would turn on the light and feel bad of the pollution and other people's optical space. I could listen to some music, but it'd be kind of, again, not an ideal listening environment. I could sleep, but there was some stranger next to me, and who knows what can happen. And yeah, so most of the time I just end up playing some silly games on my phone for like 10 minutes and then listening to a podcast for 10 minutes, listening to music 10 minutes. It's usually that. It's these neurotic rotation between menial media tasks. And I can't really commit myself to really any long form distraction. It's just maybe it is anxiety. It probably is anxiety. Same thing with driving. I mean, I don't drive, so that's another story. But road trips, a lot of just sitting in the car, feeling like I just want to get this over with. I mean, if there were like teleports or portal guns, I would probably be a world traveler. I like going around for new experiences. It's just getting there that is prohibitive. So yeah, not looking forward to a 3-hour flight and then 3-hour drive and then 12-hour work days and then another 3-hour drive back and a 3-hour flight, which is like at 6 a.m. or something ridiculous, which I don't mind because that helps me sleep on the plane, kill some time. But it's going to be a long, long June. I feel like there should be one more thing to talk about, and I can't think of anything. Yeah, I guess my life isn't as interesting as I thought. Anyway, if you're new to the show, you might be wondering, why is this guy talking by himself? What is the show really about? If this is the second show you listen to, you might be wondering, why is he doing the same line, if this is the first time listening, you may be wondering, he said that before. This is your third episode. You may be wondering, wow, yeah, he also said those the last 2 times. And then you look over to the other 2 people that I mentioned, and you all nodded your head in agreement. Well, to answer all your questions, I'll just tell you what the show is about. The Wheelhouse. Every week, usually, I would have some people with me, but they abandoned me. And we would recommend to each other some media, e.g., a book, a video game, a movie, an album. I don't know why I said book. We haven't actually recommended straight up book. Anyway, point is, we recommend it, and then that week we go out, we play, listen, read, do all those things, come back, review them, and then that same episode we recommend another slate of media, because the cycle never ends. It never will end. As long as I'm alive, it'll never end. And today, I'm reviewing last week's recommendation, which is, first on the Wheelhouse, an anime, Your Lie in April, recommended by Mason Steger. So, because I spent the time and watched this entire show, I would like to speak liberally, and that means I want to talk without being inhibited by so-called spoilers. So, what I'm going to do is do a quick, maybe 1-2 minute summary and sort of capsule review about my overall thoughts, and then I'll do a way in-depth full review where I'll talk about everything about the show. So I'll do my little mini review right now and then let you know it's over, and then if you want to go see the show without being spoiled, you can. And mini spoiler, you should, because I think the show is really good. It's a very good anime. I'm not an anime expert, so I have not much to compare it to within the medium, but overall it was very enjoyable for its endearing characters. It has a beautiful style, and it has an incredibly emotional, albeit predictable storyline. Your Lie in April is about Kyōhei Arima, who is a piano prodigy who, after the death of his mother, loses his ability to hear himself play the piano, and thus stops playing recitals altogether. But everything changes when he meets Kyōhei, a classmate and violinist. He meets this girl under full-bloomed cherry blossoms, and his fate begins to change. So, first thing that I love about this show, love the characters. They all have very distinct personalities. Kyōhei is very quiet, yet contemplative. Kyōhei is very free-spirited and very passionate about music and her performances. Then you have 2 of their friends, Tsubaki, who is very energetic, but also caring, and very complex. She may well be my favorite character in the whole show. And then you have Watari, who is basically comedy relief, to sort of balance out the friend group, so to speak. And the interaction between all the characters is great. It's very funny and well written, and it's definitely, well, for me, what was most engaging and rewarding about the show. As far as style goes, it is really beautiful. The most notable thing, if you just even watch the first 5 minutes, it's very colorful, and it completely uses that to its advantage. It just brings the entire world to life. The animation, very fluid, which is important for musical performance. It really captures all the sort of minute details you need to do that. And very cinematic-like in its presentation at times. Very film-like camera angles and camera movement. But I had 2 main problems with the show. One, it felt imbalanced at times. Side characters like Tsubaki and Watari sort of are sometimes they feel like they're absent for long stretches. And then they have a couple episode run where they're more prominent, or it focuses on, this mini plot about them. I definitely wanted a little bit more sort of intertwining between those subplots and have sort of these little updates, so to speak, throughout the show. And something that definitely stuck with me was the ending, but the ending is very abrupt. The sort of what you would call the climax occurs about 2/3 of the way through the last episode, and it leaves less than 10 minutes for proper resolution. And by the end, there are a lot of loose ends left loose. And it definitely wanted maybe a full episode to tie everything together, because a lot of stuff happens. I think what a better thing to have done was have the climax be the end of the episode 21, episode 22 be sort of the retrospective, everything is sort of resolved. Because there's some side characters you just don't see again, and there's some really cool characters you just don't see again. Overall, this is a downer of a show, but I would say it is still definitely worth viewing for all the good things I mentioned. So yeah, you should go see it. And now, that ends my mini capsule review. Go out and see this. I think it's worth seeing. Maybe not all at once. It is a huge emotional investment, and the return on your investment has probably tears, if you like that kind of thing. So now I'm going to go full spoiler territory. This is your final warning. Go, leave, turn off. Watch the show, come back, and then listen to the rest of this. Starting now. So Your Lie in April can be split into two halves. The first half, the first 11 episodes, is focused on one main storyline, and that's with Kyōhei trying to come to terms with the death of his mother, and also, meeting Kyōhei for the first time and falling in love, all that jazz. And in the second half, the last 11 episodes is more focused on Kyōhei's illness and her inevitable death. And then also Kyōhei coming to terms with that. But for now, let us start at the beginning, which I've got to say, probably overall, my favorite episodes are the first few episodes, because all the great things about Your Lie in April are all present in the first few episodes, and they're all there at once. So it makes a great impression. Like I mentioned before, just visually, and the style is just great. It's beautifully drawn. It's super colorful. And the animation is great. Builds the world. And also the animation, which struck me, is that it's very smart at times. Some of the decisions that they made. One thing that they do a couple times, there's these almost freeze frames where the characters are almost in the background, but they're not moving. They're completely still. And then the background around them is sort of moving, like, a blowing curtain or something like that. And they're talking. The characters are talking. But it's almost like a painting, how it's presented. It's very poetic. And another thing they do, again, I don't know if other anime do this, but I thought this was really clever, how there's a lot of close-ups with hands and eyes. And eyes are really important. But with Kyōhei, he wears glasses. But what they decide to do is that the sides of the glasses are just not drawn. So you could sort of see his expressions of his eyes without the glasses getting in the way. Really, really effective. The characters are all great. They have distinct personalities that are established right off the bat, in part to their very memorable introductions when you first meet the characters. It's really, really cool. Very funny, the interactions between the characters. One thing that the show does a lot are these like chibi moments where they sort of over-exaggerate these emotions to these cartoony style and really vibrant actions. And I always thought that it was really funny to sort of lighten the mood, so to speak. The music is great. Balances, that's sort of what you expect from, a TV show and anime. But also, paying homage almost to the classical style and music that is, so integral into the story. And then also the use of flashbacks and fantasy sequences early on felt very fresh, and they never felt forced. It felt like it fit in perfectly with the story they're trying to tell, and it definitely built out the story in an effective way. And all these things really reminded me of Persona 4, a video game that I played last year. It's about a high school student in Japan hanging out with other high school kids. And while, yes, the main form of gameplay is you enter this crazy TV world and battle monsters, what I love about Persona 4, and also about Your Lie in April, is just the more banal activity, just walking around town, going to school, hanging with friends, because the characters and the world are so well built. It just feels so great just to be a part of that world. And I felt the same way with the show. And there is this really nice contrast between the grounded elements and the more magical elements in Your Lie in April. The grounded elements being, just the friends, going to junior high, doing their junior high thing, but also in the presentation, it is very magical. It being super colorful, sort of greater than life almost. But things get complicated. Of course, we got Kyōhei, main character, and his psychological battle. Like I said, first 11 episodes is about dealing with the death of his mother, who, his mother, Saki, was very abusive to Kyōhei growing up, especially when it came to playing piano. She put him through a very draconian regimen, very strict, had to practice all the time, didn't have a lot of free time to hang out with friends and do what he wanted. And that's mainly because his mother's philosophy was you have to be a slave to the score. You need to play the piece exactly as the composer intended. Because of that, because they had been labeled, a puppet of his mother, a human metronome, because of how just technically inflexible he was. But, of course, he meets Kyōhei, who is very much the opposite. She's super outgoing and very expressive, and the first time they meet each other, probably the best and most memorable introduction of a character. When Kyōhei accuses, Kyōhei of being a voyeur, trying to get an upskirt. Super funny. It's just a great way to start that relationship and try to, build from there. But they do have a shared passion for music. Kyōhei being a very, very skilled violinist. But her performance style is completely different. She sort of derives her performance from feeling and emotion and just making a connection with the music and not sticking to what's on paper, which is completely foreign to Kyōhei. He does not even know how to do that. And as is expected, we know, Kyōhei becomes completely enamored with Kyōhei, and sort of this Kyōhei's philosophy of playing music is what gets Kyōhei to, dive back into the world of competitive piano playing. And more or less, that's what happens for that plot line. Predictably, Kyōhei, opens his eyes, so to speak, and begins to live again, air quotes. And visually, this is conveyed through, a transition from Kyōhei's world being more monochromatic to being really colorful to match Kyōhei's personality. But this predictability is problematic. The relationship between the two felt very aimless at times, that not much progress was being made episode to episode. In addition, Kyōhei sort of hits the same psychological walls frequently. And in both aspects, I felt like, it's just a matter of time before A, he gets over his crutch, and B, their relationship solidifies. So it was a little tedious at times. In addition, there's a lot of philosophical musing and what I call musical platitudes. Stuff like, oh man, the power of music. Music transcends words. We're on a journey sailing uncharted waters. It can be kind of grating at times, especially how frequently a lot of the conversation between Kyōhei and Kyōhei boil down to one of those things. And another problem stylistically is that there's an over-reliant use of what I call VO quick flashback combo. And this is especially prominent in the recital sequences where, Kyōhei would start playing the piano and then he has this internal monologue, which is fine. But then what it starts doing is visually it shows flashbacks of things that happened earlier in the day, things that happened, in a conversation that past week, or things that happened to him when he was growing up. And there's sort of this voiceover sort of commenting on all that, tying everything that he has learned recently, especially with his interaction with Kyōhei, to everything that's happened to him in the past, trying to reconcile that while struggling to play the piano. And the first few times, this is really effective. I mean, one of the early episodes, the entire episode is just that recital, but it relies on sort of that VO and flashback. And I thought, oh wow, this is really cool how they managed to, stretch out this one performance to a full 23 minutes. But that happens all the time, pretty much. Not even, it starts happening outside of just the piano recitals to just, Kyōhei sad walking through the street and doing all this stuff. So, a little bit too much. And in general, there's a lot of moodiness, and especially Kyōhei, very, very brooding. And a lot of crying between characters, a lot of melodrama. And I was like, man, this is a little bit too much. But then, I always have to remember, they're in junior high. And sometimes I need to pull myself out of the story and just look back and like, yeah, they're young. They're pretty much kids. dealing with all this stuff. And also, it's just a straight up love story when you get down to it. And when you keep those two things in mind, that it's a love story in junior high, then me at least, I tended to tolerate more some of the more saccharine moments. It's unavoidable. Some of these things has to happen when you do a love story in junior high. But definitely for me, the standout moments are, a lot of them come in the actual recitals or piano competitions. For one, the animation is beautiful. I think definitely, if you pay attention to the hands, it looks like they rotoscoped it, because it looks really lifelike. And there's a lot of close-up on eyes too, which I appreciate. And just in general, there's a lot of tension built in. One of my favorite motifs that occurs a lot, especially in the first half of the show, is this underwater motif where, Kyōhei comes to a point in the performance where he can't hear the notes anymore, and he feels like he's playing underwater because sort of everything sort of moves in slow motion and everything's muted, and you also see sort of the notes kind of fleeting off of the page. I really love that effect. It's just visually arresting as well as very thematic. And then another recital that stood out to me was in episode 10. It sort of encapsulates Kyōhei's sort of struggle and progress that he's been making up to that point. In that one performance, he plays with 3 different styles. At first, it's very, robotic, harkening back to how he had played because of his mother's influence. But then the next style is a lot more tormented. He is sort of trying to battle against that. But then he finally sort of overcomes that in a sense. And because of the influence of his friends, in particular Kyōhei, he plays a lot more passionately and doesn't really follow what's on the page. It comes from a place of love. And through these, recitals in general, because of the voiceover and flashbacks, we learn a lot more about Kyōhei's backstory. In particular, the relationship with his mother Saki, which I always thought was very simple. I just thought, she was mean to him and abusive and made him play piano a lot, and then he died and he's sad and that's why he can't play anymore. But it's actually more deep than that. It sort of revealed that Saki was sort of pushing Kyōhei because she was frustrated with herself, that she knew she was dying and felt like she couldn't leave him with anything, and this might be the only sort of respite for that. There is a pivotal flashback where Saki berates Kyōhei and publicly hits him, and then in response to that, Kyōhei says, I wish you would die. That was the last thing he had said to his mother, so of course he blames himself for her death. And it's important because his motivation up to that point was that if he would play piano well, then that his mother would get well, because that's sort of, what she wants. So, her death completely devastates him, obviously. But through the influence of his friends, Kyōhei in particular, Kyōhei is able to sort of reconcile the troubles of his past. And some character even mentions that the puppet has severed its strings. And that's sort of the end of that main storyline. And then you got the next 11 episodes, which you can know that something different is going to happen right off the bat, because new theme song, also a new song for the credits. And if you notice, the imagery there, it's a lot more centered on Kyōhei, especially the credits. It's basically just her the whole time. And what do you know? The last 11 episodes, it's really about her illness and the relationship between her and Kyōhei. And as early as episode 12, probably even earlier, I think, it's well telegraphed, Kyōhei is sick. And what I do like about that is that it's obscure as to exactly what she ails from, exactly to what extent is she ill. They never really answered that, which I like. But by this point in the show, I'm getting some general feelings. Yes, at this point, the story is more focused on Kyōhei and Kyōhei. And I felt like some of the side characters were getting the short end of the stick, I like the 2 friends, Tsubuki and Watari. You don't really, they only show up intermittently. And you have like Takashi and Emi, who are introduced, who are sort of Kyōhei's rivals. Because growing up as kids, they always lost to Kyōhei in the piano competitions. And their appearances are scattered as well. And I wanted to see more of them because, like Saki, I thought they had very shallow motivations, that they just wanted to, get back at him. But it sort of revealed that it's a little bit more than that, how they actually really aspire to be as great as him. There are even more side characters. You have Hiroko, who was, I believe, a student of Saki, and then she becomes sort of Kozei's mentor. And you also have Nagi, who is revealed to be Takashi's younger sister, and Kozei takes her under his wing and mentors her. These are all great characters, but I don't think they really get their due time. In addition, I felt a little strain when it came to the piano competitions. It's because of that reliance on that VO quick flashback combo is becoming overused, and these sequences tended to turn to drone on. And I really just wanted to go back to the good old days, so to speak, of just our friends hanging out, doing everyday school stuff. But alas, no dice. But one good generalization I had at this point was I remember sitting there thinking to myself, I like this show. Whenever an episode ends, I want to watch the next one. And something as simple as that, if the fact that I recognize it, and you're like, okay, for all these things I'm pointing out that I wish they could have done better, end of the day, it's good and I liked it. And I'm glad I stuck with it because episodes 14 and 15 are a couple of my favorite episodes. I love them because they shift perspective. All this time you have everything is from sort of Kozei's perspective, but now it shifts to Tsubaki, her perspective. A lot more of her voiceover, nearly entirely. And it definitely solidifies the love triangle that's present between her, Kyōhei, and Kozei. And she is a very complex character. She was childhood friends with Kozei, but as they're getting older, she's sort of in denial of seeing Kozei in a romantic light. There is one sequence that I love, an icon. I don't know why I'm saying icon and making all these terms like I own them. The Claire de Lune popsicle sequence, where Tsubaki and Kozei are walking along the beach eating popsicles as they did when they were kids, and Kozei reveals that he is probably going to leave home to go to high school, pursuing music. And Tsubaki, upon hearing this, breaks down and runs away. And I thought that was the first genuinely moving moment, because it was the sort of culmination of everything we knew about the relationship, especially because of how many flashbacks we see of them as kids. Definitely establishes that backstory really well. And then you see all the new problems and elements that their relationship face, with Kozei trying to get back to play piano, and obviously the introduction of Kyōhei's character complicates things. And I wanted more from her character, and we do get a little bit more in episode 20. She, verbally admits her love for Kozei, but just in general, I mentioned before that imbalance. I wanted more from the side characters, Takashi and Emi. You don't really see them enough. You do sometimes. Episode 19, when they bond with Kozei over egg sandwiches, great sequence. There could have been more like it. Hiroko, I wanted to see how she would act, as sort of a substitute to Kozei's, that mother role that he needed. Nagi, how sort of the change within Kozei is able to, benefit others. But really, the show is a focus on Kozei and Kyōhei. And this may be controversial, but I really did not feel a strong desire to see more of their story, because we all know what's going to happen. Boy meets girl, girl changes boy, girl dies, boy has to live with that. And I was really hoping at this point that there was some other hit, some emotional gut punch that sort of shifts how we see her illness, because it is pretty straightforward. She's sick, and that's it. And it complicates things, but not to any surprising level. I wanted a little extra element added in. I don't know, something like, Kyōhei's illness, a mysterious illness, can only be healed with the blood from the hands of a pianist. And the only one who can provide it right now is Kozei. We have to amputate your hands for her to live, but you will never be able to play piano again. Of course that's ridiculous, but something in that vein that adds another layer of complexity to this issue. And of course we do get some simple visual changes, which I appreciate. Kyōhei's world becomes more monochromatic, and she herself becomes more pale. But it is a sort of tedious lingering with their relationship, because it is all centered around what is, inevitable. But we get to episode 22, the final episode, and you see Kyōhei's final performance in a very spectacular way. You see this sort of fantasy landscape with this crystal blue water, completely still, and this glistening, colorful snow. And you get a duet. You get to see Kyōhei on piano, Kyōhei on violin, play with each other, because that's something they always wanted to do. And after the first time they did it, but because of Kyōhei's illness, she's not able to. So it's very poignant to see that, and it solidifies how through this journey, all the people that have influenced Kyōhei have also influenced how he plays. But once that performance ends, that's the story. Also, kind of ends. It's very abrupt, like I mentioned. The sort of resolution is only like 10 minutes long to sort of wrap up the entire story. Right after the performance, the first thing we see is a funeral. With Kyōhei talking to Kyōhei's parents, and you're like, oh, well, I guess she did die. That was fast. And by the end, the very end, there are a lot of unresolved threads. Did Kyōhei win the competition? Which high school is he going to? Which high school is Tsubaki going to? What about Watari? How's Hiroko doing? A lot of these things are left open. We don't really get closure to any of that. Instead, we have a reveal, a twist almost, in a letter to Kyōhei. Says that she lied about wanting to meet Watari originally, that she really wanted to actually meet Kyōhei because as a kid, she saw a performance of Kyōhei and was so moved. She was moved to tears by it that she decided that she wanted to pick up the violin to play with him eventually. And I do not know how I feel about this. I mean, it's not some revelatory M. Night Shyamalan twist like Kyōhei was dead the whole time. But then again, it fits in a very strange place because she is just another on a very long list of other people who have heard Kyōhei perform and just their entire life has changed. Takashi and Emi, the path of their life changed, because of Kyōhei. Now they're completely pursuing piano. Even Hiroko, her life is changed by seeing Kyōhei play as a young kid for the first time. And she said, this kid's got to learn to play piano. Tsubaki too. It is, I don't know if convenience is the right word. It's just sort of uncanny how often this happens. That this prodigy sort of gets people in the same way all the time. I was just like, oh, you too. You're another one, And by the end, I gotta say, I was a little unsatisfied because of the things I mentioned. And Mason, who recommended this, recommended also to pack a box of tissues next to you when you watch this. And I was not in tears by the end because for me there was no gut punch to do that. But I did tear up a couple times prior to the very ending. There was this one time, a flashback, when Kyōhei's mother abandons a cat that Kyōhei found named Chelsea. And Kyōhei looks around everywhere in desperation and eventually cries. And Tsubaki comes and comforts him. And I thought that was very touching and a very moving sequence. But the one that definitely resonated with me the most was in episode 21. Kyōhei is completely downtrodden by Kyōhei's illness and doesn't know if he can perform. He's kind of just hunched over in the waiting room. And it's just a simple shot of Takashi over his shoulder, comforting him, saying just simply like, are you okay? And for me, that spoke to me because it was a complete arc of that character. We go from him to being completely hostile and a rival to him warming up and looking at him as a compatriot and a comrade, because we've always seen that character as being very firm and competitive, but to see him be so caring, it is pretty good. But although the very ending did not have me bawling, for the couple days after I finished watching the show, I was pretty depressed, overall very gloomy mood. Yes, this show is very depressing. There's no two ways about it. And it is a long investment. It's like 8 to 9 hours watching the whole show with ad block on, which I recommend you do. And so it sticks with you. And it's not like some 2-hour movie where they might have some sad good punch of an ending. But because it is a lower temporal investment, it kind of, the feeling fleets sooner. Because you just stick with these characters so long, so they stay in your mind. You feel like you know them better. In addition, there is a sadness, which I've experienced many a time, at the end of a good story. This happens all the time, in books, movies, shows, video games, where you lament the fact that you won't see these characters anymore. And you won't be able to see the further interaction, the furthering of their story. One time I know this definitely happened was the series Mass Effect. That's a series of 3 very, very long games. And it's a continual story, and you interact with the same characters, you form bonds between them, and have that story end. Not commenting on the fact how the ending of Mass Effect 3 itself was pretty atrocious. That's the fact that it ended in general, that series, how you won't be able to see the further adventures of Commander Shepard and whatnot. It's sad. And so yeah, both of those things together left me kind of in a depressive state. But to summarize, I do definitely think the show is very good and is worth watching. Don't know if you want to watch it all at once, because you might be fully in tears. Maybe that's what Mason did. He watched the whole show in one sitting. That's why he was crying, not from the fact that it was sad, but how he just sat in the same spot for 8-9 hours. But yeah, I would still recommend this show. Hey, and maybe if I watched a ton more anime, I'd be like, yeah, this one's actually not that good. But as someone who has not had a lot of experience, I think it was worth it. And now, any second, someone should teleport right to me.
Andrew, holy shit, how did I get here?
Oh, the same thing we've done the last 3 weeks. The power of Skype.
Oh. So it's like this thing where I can talk to you and see you without being there.
Yeah.
Damn.
Even though you're like 500 miles away or something.
Crap.
Yeah.
Well, okay then, dude, let's do this.
Let us talk about the Beatles album Revolver, which I brought up last week, recommended it, and as one of our essential albums for who is Bruce Springsteen. And you had recognized some of the songs on here, and in general, you knew a little more about the Beatles than our previous entries.
Yeah.
So my first question is, how many of the members of the Beatles can you name?
I can actually name all of them. Paul McCartney, John Lennon, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr. For the longest time, I could never remember George Harrison because most people agree that like Paul McCartney and John Lennon are the ones who really matter, and then Ringo and George Harrison aren't as important. And George Harrison, Ringo I could always remember because everybody would always say he was the least important member. Mm-hmm. But George Harrison was kind of like in the middle, so I just always forgot about him.
And his name too isn't,
yeah, it's not a very memorable name.
Catchy.
Yeah, it's not like Ringo. Like that's not even a real name.
And Starr.
Yeah.
Yeah, stands out. So we listened to Revolver.
Yeah, I did.
The 17th album by the Beatles, and what did you think?
I enjoyed it quite a bit actually. Something I've always found about Beatles songs is. For me, at least personally, I generally can divide them into 4 categories. There are songs that are just very straightforward and blunt. Like, on this album, you have Taxman. The message, taxes suck. Fuck taxes. It's not any more, doesn't get much simpler than that.
Agreed.
And then there are songs that have probably a lot more subtext, and you can read a lot more into them, like For No One, which I'm really not fully sure what it's about, but I feel like there's some, there's probably lots of meaning hidden underneath there. The third category is songs that are complete nonsense, like I Am the Walrus or Yellow Submarine.
Yeah.
And the fourth category are songs about drugs.
I would have to say those last 3 categories, I think, could all be under the umbrella of drugs. They're just different. It's to what extent is the drug influencing the songwriting? Which
That's probably
yes,
pretty accurate, actually.
you have something like Yellow Submarine, and I know Bill Hicks has done a bits where defending drug use because like all the best rock records have been done under the influence, so to speak. It's like, how else can you get a song about like we all live in a yellow submarine, you know? And then there's another song. Yeah, Got to Get You Into My Life, right?
Yeah.
Paul McCartney himself said, quote, "It's actually an ode to pot." Like straight up, it's not for some girl. It's not a love ballad. It's about weed. And you don't need to know that. You listen to the song, you're like, wow, this is a great song. It's really catchy. There's a lot of great hooks. And it's like, without drugs, that song couldn't have come into being. But yeah, drugs, man.
Okay. Yeah.
Continue.
Quite the artistic enabler. But yeah, that sums up my thought. That's like the summary of my thoughts on the album is that it's kind of a mixture of all four, or as you would say, two categories. All the songs, I mean, they're Beatles songs. Like, what can you say? I can't really say I've ever heard a Beatles song that I thought was bad. I think most people generally agree that even the worst Beatles songs are at least a little good. So, I guess I'll start with some of the ones I like the most, which
Sure, yeah.
I would say Tomorrow Never Knows was possibly my favorite on the album.
Ooh, that's very interesting.
Really?
Because yeah, that's a little out of all the songs on there. It's at least poppy. It's a little bit. Well, it is more far out, so to speak. Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure there were some drugs involved in this. I'm sure there were a little bit of drugs involved in most of their or almost all of their songs.
But what resonated with you for Tomorrow Never Knows?
Well, first of all, just the title, Tomorrow Never Knows, which to me that makes me think like, who knows what their real intentions were. But to me the title, it's like you never know what's gonna happen. You can't stress about every little thing. You just kind of have to appreciate the moment, because I'm definitely a person who is always freaking out about his future. I'm always freaking out about tomorrow. Like, a week ago or a few weeks back, I noticed I hadn't submitted my CSS profile yet for SMU. Now, that's really important, because without the CSS profile, one of my grants comes from me submitting that to SMU, and without that grant, I can't go to SMU. So I was freaking out. I submitted it immediately. I emailed my financial advisor to ask him if it'd be okay, because I submitted it much later than usual. And that whole night, I couldn't sleep at all. I was just freaking the shit out. And then the next, that was the worst night's sleep I had gotten in a long time.
And then you looked out the window and played Tomorrow Never Knows on loop for 3 hours straight. Okay.
No. But the next morning, I looked at my emails. My financial advisor got back to me, and he's like, "Yeah, no, it's fine. Don't worry about it." I'm like, oh my God. Like, I just spent a whole night freaking out, like losing my shit over something that I didn't know if it was going to turn out okay, and then it turned out it was fine. And it's just like, so a title like Tomorrow Never Knows, that's something that resonates with me, because it's something that's very relevant to me, because I do worry about the future a lot. And I mean, ultimately, you never know what's going to happen, so you can't worry too much about the things that are out of your control.
And you take a lot of drugs.
Yeah, obviously.
All the time.
Totally. Yeah, no, I mean, who doesn't?
Yeah. Any other standouts for you on Revolver?
I really liked Eleanor Rigby, actually, because the first couple times I listened to it, I had no idea what it was really about. I mean, like, loneliness, sure, but I looked it up online, and apparently it's supposed to be about old people who, like, their grandkids never visit them, and they're just, like, being forgotten and left behind and waiting to die, and I'm like, holy shit, that's really dark.
Yeah, it has all that subtext in there.
Like, wow.
There's like these two, narratives of Eleanor Rigby and then Father Mackenzie doing their own thing, being lonely. And at the end, they kind of meet each other, but Eleanor's dead. So that's even really more dark. But yeah, that's a great one.
And see, I would say also Here, There, and Everywhere.
Oh yeah, that's probably one of my favorites, if not my favorite.
Yeah, and interestingly, when I read the Wikipedia page, it said it was inspired by God Only Knows from the Beach Boy album I listened to last week.
Yeah. Yeah, like I mentioned before, 1965, you had Beatles release Rubber Soul. That inspired Brian Wilson to try and top that. He released Pet Sounds, and then Paul McCartney listened to Pet Sounds and thought, man, God Only Knows, especially, he thought it was like the greatest song ever written. And so, in response to that, Here, There, and Everywhere. And then much later, Sgt. Pepper's, not much later, a year later, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. So, yeah, the song's so beautiful. It's like perfect, I think. Is there any songs you don't like?
No, there were some songs. Yeah, like I said at the beginning, I don't think I can really say there are any like bad Beatles songs because even the ones that I don't really connect with, they're usually enjoyable. They're usually like either poppy or fun or like upbeat. And so it's hard to say that there's any I just like didn't like listening to. I can say there are probably some I didn't enjoy as much as others. Like I'm Only Sleeping or let's see, or Taxman actually.
Mm-hmm.
Just because they didn't just for the reason that I didn't connect with them the way I connected with some of the other songs.
Yeah, Taxman took me a while. It had to grow on me because, yeah, it is a more conventional rock song compared to some of the more experimental ones on here. But if you try and revisit it, you might appreciate more the instrumentation. Because, yeah, it is more straightforward, but I think it's still great. How about that Yellow Submarine? I'm actually not too hot on Yellow Submarine. It actually drives me crazy a little bit.
I like it because this is one of those songs that they have said is complete nonsense and intended to be nonsense. And I like it because of that. I understand why some people wouldn't, because some people would look at a song like Yellow Submarine and be like, oh, a song that's intended to be nonsense. That's so pretentious and like, trying too hard to be artistic. And I can totally understand why some people would think that. But I don't know, I'm just like, I just don't take it that seriously. I'm just like, they were clearly on something when they wrote it, and it's clearly just meant to be fun. And their lyrics, I don't know who else would have thought of those lyrics. So
yeah, it doesn't bother me because it's nonsensical. It actually bothered me a little bit how people try and like dig deep into the meaning behind the lyrics and try and give all these interpretations. I mean, it's literally it's just nonsense.
Yeah, it's random crap.
Yeah. But just for me, I think that's the vocals. It's very almost drony. And if I imagine like that main chorus, we all live in the Yellow Submarine, if you play that on a loop, I might actually drive me crazy. It kind of reminds me a little bit of that Disney song, like It's a Small World After All. Do you know that one?
Oh yeah.
And like there's like this
oh my God.
There's just like a tour, like a amusement park ride, and that song plays. And apparently some guy got stuck on it. And it played on a loop for like hours and hours, and he was like going crazy or something. So, yeah. So, that's that. Anyway, once again, I have some information to school you on Revolver. Beatles, 17th album, released August 5th, 1966. Their previous album, Rubber Soul, 1965, was a huge success. And it was their first sort of foray into doing some more experimentation. And in Revolver, they go full out experimentation. They're all over the board. I'm sure you could tell, like, there's 14 songs. They're all very short. The longest one is like 3 minutes. But they all do a lot of different things. For example, this is the first time they really solidified their psychedelic sound, as we've mentioned, in large part due to their experimentation with drugs, marijuana, LSD in particular. Tomorrow Never Knows and Yellow Submarine especially. A lot of distorted sounds, very dreamlike production. You even have some Baroque sound in like For No One that features a clavichord and French horn. You have another influence is the Indian classical music brought by
Yeah, I
George.
noticed that.
Yeah, that was George Harrison. That was completely him. And also a big thing with Revolver, it definitely marked him having a larger role as far as songwriting goes. He has the larger roles, starting with Revolver.
Wait,
and
who
then
has the larger role?
George Harrison.
Okay.
He wrote 3 songs on this album: Taxman, Love You Too, and I Want to Tell You. And Love You Too in particular is a straight up, the entire song has that Indian classical sound. And it was the first time that sort of aesthetic was brought to the West in a way that was, authentic and portrayed it as in an artful way. So that was a pretty big deal. And it definitely opened up the other Beatles to sort of experimenting with not only the Indian sound, but other sounds as well. And all of this, with all of this, you have experimentation with production technique. Their producer, George Martin, who actually passed away this past March, was very, very important in the formation of this album. A lot of, in something like Tomorrow Never Knows, a lot of use of tape loops and backward recordings. Eleanor Rigby, it's just the string backing, the orchestra, and he wrote that entire part. And then you have stuff like Yellow Submarine, with all the skit sounds of sort of like background people and also the waves and stuff. All this stuff was pretty new. All this experimentation, on top of just flat out great songwriting and musical performances, like something in And Your Bird Can Sing, you have that amazing dual guitar part. And then, like we mentioned before, Here, There, and Everywhere, just like a beautiful ballad that I just think is absolutely perfect. And when it was released in Britain, it was lauded, but it actually took some time to gain steam in the US because recently John Lennon made a comment that the Beatles, in his opinion, had become more popular than Jesus.
I remember that.
Yeah, so that was a big deal. Very controversial, obviously. And there's still much debate as to what is considered the Beatles' greatest album, and you could definitely make a great case that the Revolver is it. And like I mentioned before, we had just a hard time choosing one Beatles albums to put on this essentials list. You really can't go wrong with like Sgt. Pepper, Abbey Road, Rubber Soul, even the White Album.
Yeah.
These are all I would consider in general. They're all essential, and they should be explored. And you said you really dug this album. You like the Beatles in general.
Yeah.
Definitely check out those albums. They're definitely worth doing.
I absolutely will.
Would it be safe to say that of the albums so far and Who is Bruce Springsteen, this is your favorite?
Yeah, it's safe to say that.
Okay, cool. All right, sounds good. Any final thoughts on Revolver or no?
I think we covered it. What's the album for next week?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. Speaking of experimentation, the album I'm recommending today is The Velvet Underground and Nico. It's the debut studio album by the American band The Velvet Underground. It was released March 12th, 1967. And it was a complete bomb when it was released, both critically and commercially. Only in retrospect did this album become appreciated. In 1982, Brian Eno, a British musician, famously said, quote, everyone who bought one of the... Everyone who bought one of the 30,000 copies started a band. And yeah, it is known for just being very experimental at the time. For one, the subject matter was known. It was pretty much unprecedented. They were talking very candidly about stuff like drug abuse, prostitution, BDSM, and they eschewed a lot of just the normal pop sensibilities, and they achieved a sound that was literally unheard of at the time. So yes, it is more experimental. Some wacky stuff does go on, but I think it's great, and that's why it is an essential album. It's that classic. The album art is that banana, which I think you recognized, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's that one.
I do.
Yeah. So we'll be listening to that while I'm back in Texas. But yeah, that's it for this edition of Who is Bruce Springsteen. Thanks again, Jacob.
Oh, thank you for having me, man. See you next week.
Thanks again, Jacob. I think Who is Bruce Spring is going pretty swimmingly, in my opinion. Yeah, all we have to do left is play one more recommendation so we know what we're talking about next week. Got a recording here from one Jackie Day, and this is what she has to say. I'm here with Jackie. How are you?
Hello, Andrew.
How's your job?
It's okay.
Okay.
It's okay.
Well,
Not
we've
really.
pulled you out of your job a little bit to recommend something. What are you recommending?
I am recommending an album by the band Alvvays, spelled with no W but two V's. It's their
Fancy.
it is self-titled album, so therefore also called Alvvays.
Is it their debut album?
Yeah, I don't know. Fuck, let me just Wikipedia that real
'Cause,
fast.
Sometimes
It
debut
is.
albums are
It is
their name,
self-titled
but okay.
and debut. You call that? That makes sense. Yeah, I don't know. I've just been listening to a lot recently. It's kind of like a chill summer vibe for real. So like that's been the mood lately. Considering fucking finals.
So you said you've listened to it recently. So how did you find out about this band?
Lol. Okay. Well, originally I was like a couple times I was like walking around Deep Ellum with like my friend Sam Cooper. Shout out. I hate you. And we would like see a like concert or a concert poster on like some random window in Deep Ellum. He's like, oh, Alvvays, like they're pretty good. I want to go to that concert. I was like, okay, whatever. And then in human sexuality class I have with Paul Lujan, shout out. He was like, yo, I'm going to see this band. Do you want to go? And I was like, oh, like cool. Like I gotta listen to them. But by the time I figured out that I liked them and that I wanted to go, I already had tickets to a different concert that night, which was kind of lame. So yeah. But Paul went. He said it was cool.
Okay. So genre-wise, what is this?
That
What
was
is their
an
music
extended
like?
story. Oh, genre-wise? Fuck. I don't know. Kind of like...
Or maybe any other bands that are similar.
Lol. Fuck, I don't know. It's kind of like beachy, guitar-y. It sounds sort of West Coasty, you know? A little bit. It kind of reminds me of Best Coast, but I don't really like Best Coast because I find her voice very, like, really whiny and annoying. It's also a little whiny, but less whiny. So it's better. I like it better.
Okay. Finally, why are you recommending this album? There's so many other albums in the world. Why this one?
True enough. Well, because it's the most recently added music on my iPod, and I had like 2 minutes to prepare this.
Good reasons.
I could have also recommended the new Drake. There are like 3 songs of the new Drake that I've been listening to on repeat, like a lot. 3 songs, and then the rest of it's like bullshit, but
Maybe next time.
next time for sure.
Okay. All right.
Cool.
I'll go listen to that. Thank you.
Do it. Okay, bye.
Thanks, Jackie. I'm sorry that part before, when I introduced that recording, I rhymed it. I didn't intend to. I rhymed day and say. That was unintentional, and it felt really goofy, but that's what happened. So, and that's the end of another show. Another very strange episode how this was recorded, but so it goes. What you could do now is like our Facebook page at facebook.com/wheelhousecast. Follow us on Twitter at wheelhousecast. Subscribe to our feed on iTunes where you can also rate and review us. And if you want to send an email for anything at all, I don't care. You can do so at wheelhousecast@gmail.com. Recommend something, review something, yell at us through text. You can do all that through the power of Gmail or email or Yahoo or Hotmail, whatever you got going. Thanks, Sterling. Thanks, Gus. I'm Andrew, and I am going to stop this show right now.